Hello, CAB participants. Nice to be able to podcast to you. We're just thinking that it would be helpful to take you through a few principles regarding the development of your research objectives. This is possibly one of the most challenging tasks as part of the development of your research ideas. So hopefully you'll find this helpful. So in terms of research objectives, as I've said, one of the most important and one of the most challenging aspects of the process that you're going through in terms of developing your research ideas. This is because the research aim and objectives are important in determining the shape of your particular research. It assists in helping you to scope your research ideas. It gives you depth in terms of your understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And it also defines the overall direction of the investigation that you're going to be undertaking. So your problem formulation in terms of setting these objectives really helps to define the aim of your capstone. So this work that you're undertaking at the CAB point will actually go forward, and it will help you in terms of the way in which your final piece of work on the MBA actually develops. So these objectives are going to provide you with a description of how and what you're going to try to achieve. And it is very important that at this stage, you begin to get clarity around what it is that you're trying to achieve. So when you actually go into your overall aim, that'll give you the bigger picture, but the more precise definition of your research will come with the formulation of your specific objectives. And that thinking that you put into the way in which you construct your research objectives will actually assist you as you take your investigation forward, because what it does is to define the type of study, and it also informs which methods you might be using in order to progress your future research. So I can't emphasize enough just how important this part of the program is. And we're going to be giving you specific feedback through the CAB program in terms of how you take this forward. So what we've got or would like to present is a particular model. This isn't the only model, but this is one that we've found actually quite helpful. You don't have to follow it slavishly, and you don't have to adopt it precisely. But I think what you'll find is that some of the principles behind this particular model can help you to actually develop and understand the role of different types of objectives that exist, particularly within business and management research. So by convention, research objectives usually include a number of different categories, different types of objectives that are doing different things for the research that you're conducting. And using this model to kind of take you through the flow of your research is actually very helpful and can help you to map out your research process. So the categories that we've found helpful are the following. To include what we call theoretical objective that's going to help to set the academic context, an empirical objective, which is focusing on the data and the way in which you're going to collect your data, an analysis objective, which is around, well, what am I going to do with my data? How am I going to create meaning? How am I going to understand what's going on in terms of this particular project? And with business and management research, we generally find that there is an outcome objective. So this is something, perhaps it's a set of recommendations, or perhaps it's an action plan. So what I'd like to do is just take you through each of these different types of objectives This isn't a rule, it is just a model to help you to frame your thinking and perhaps your approach to the way in which you develop your ideas. And as we go through these different categories, what I'll try to do is to also give you some examples of past students and the way in which they've tackled this particular stage of their investigation. So we'll start then with the theoretical objectives. So what I'd like you to do is think about, what are you reading at the moment in terms of the development of your research ideas? What bodies of literature are actually influencing the way in which you're developing your research idea? You've already started to identify academic articles, hopefully, and you'll be seeing what the sort of discourse, what the arguments are, and trying to relate that to the ideas that you've got that you wish to take forward. So that's the first thing. What are you reading? What is the body of literature that is actually going to inform your thinking? The other thing that you need to start doing as you unpick the literature that you're using is to identify the theories and concepts that seem to be prevalent, that seem to be influential, and seem to kind of fit with the way in which you're thinking about your research. So I've got an example for you, a couple of examples actually. So the first one, if we look at this and try to understand what it's doing, to critically evaluate the current focus and academic research regarding personalization in direct marketing in retail banking. So if I unpick that very briefly, first of all, notice the language, critically evaluate. So at master's level, we need to include this in the wording of the objectives. It's no good to say describe or discuss. This is a much more active approach, which is this critical evaluation. So this objective also signposts that we're going to look at the academic research and the way in which the academic research regarding the topic, which is personalization in direct marketing, the way in which the topic has developed and the specific academic sources that are going to actually inform the development. The other interesting thing I think about this example is that it focuses on the research context itself. So it's giving us a clear indication of where this particular research is going to be located, i.e. retail banking. So nice, tight, short, sharp objective, but really does pack in a lot of information. So let's have a look at the second one. To critically evaluate models and academic frameworks that explore tourist decision-making processes. Again, that critical evaluation. Now we're using the language of models and academic frameworks, and also locating it in terms of a particular set of individuals. So, for example, we've identified tourists as the key focus of this particular investigation. And we've also identified a certain domain, and that is decision-making processes, i.e. decisions for which perhaps tourist experiences they want to engage in. So what have we learned? The articulation of this theoretical objective is highlighting the conceptual focus of the research, the conceptual focus. And I think that's really important for you to be thinking very clearly about what the conceptual focus is. And this type of objective may be presented in different ways, depending on which capstone route you adopt. It would be unusual to have a theoretical objective in, for example, a practical consultancy project. However, a theoretical objective may have a role in one of the elements of the practical capstone consultancy projects. In the capstone that deals with business startup and also the consultancy project route, you have to engage with a reflective critique. And it's the reflective critique that deals with the academic dimension of the project that you're doing. So with the more practical capstone routes, there's a tendency to separate the conceptual from the actual empirical side of the work that you're actually undertaking. So it might not be an actual sort of part of the objectives for your client document that you're trying to achieve in those practical elements. We'll pick up on some of these issues later on when we look at the different types of capstones. So to progress to the empirical objectives, there's a good question here. You know, what kind of data are you intending to collect? Where's your data going to come from? Are you going to focus on primary data, secondary data? What are your sources of data that you anticipate you're going to be able to use as part of your research design? So this objective, not only will it identify types of data, it may also identify your approach to the collection of data or your method of data collection. So that sounds quite complicated, but I think if we try to unpick it by giving some examples, we can get more clarity. So I've got 3 examples for you. First of all, the first one is to identify and critically evaluate the key drivers influencing travellers' choices regarding bespoke travel agencies. So here, what's been done is to identify what we're trying to do, who we're going to try to get data from. So for example, we need to identify people who are making choices regarding who they go to provide travel services. And the focus is going to be on bespoke travel agencies. And we need to identify the people who are using these agencies, but also we've identified that it's around looking at what influences their choices regarding their travel decisions. So it's a nice objective, this, because it's identifying the type of data, i.e. the key drivers that are influencing travellers. It's also identifying the type of people that we want to gather data from. Note also that is that level of critical evaluation. So a second example here, to survey customer perspectives of service quality in high-end restaurants in Singapore. So we've located it in Singapore. We've identified the type of organisation we want to collect data from, high-end restaurants, and we've also identified the source of that data, which is the customers of those high-end restaurants. The other interesting thing to note here, indicated in this objectives, is the type of data. And the type of data is implicitly linked to the fact that we're using a survey method. So we're looking for quantitative data that's going to be collected through a survey. We've identified who we're going to target in terms of that survey, and we've located the piece of research. So again, a really nice example of how lots of different indications of what we're trying to do are in quite a simple sentence. And this is very difficult to achieve. And you may go through many different iterations in order to get something quite as precise and focused as this particular example. So the third example to take you through is to explore levels of employee engagement with the implementation of digital technologies in XYZ Limited. Again, nice focused objective, and it's indicating it's exploratory research. It's looking at employees in a specific organisation. So what we've got here is an indication that we're using qualitative data and we're adopting a case study approach. So this, this focus on an organization, a specific organization, really helps us to define the scope and the boundaries of the investigation, the potential investigation. So 3 really nice examples there that are giving us a good indication as to where our research is going to be located, and also who we're going to target for data and the type of data that we're intending to collect. So moving on to the third type of objective, and this is analysis objectives. Analysis is a process whereby what you're trying to do is to bring together different types of information and to start to make sense of that information in relation to the story that you're actually telling through your research. Analysis objectives, particularly around the synthesis of literature and empirical data. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that you would have been doing all your background reading and research. You'll have data from authors who have published in this area, usually peer-reviewed literature, and you'll have perhaps collected some empirical data. That could be statistics about particular trends in a sector, or it could be interview data that you've got from employees in an organization. And that whole analysis process is about bringing together those 2 elements of your research, the conceptual side and the empirical side, the data that is different in many respects to your literature. Again, we'll be going through some of these ideas later on as part of CAB. So I've got an example for you. To critically evaluate key themes and issues identified through in-depth interviews with employees in XYZ Limited, using models and frameworks associated with technology acceptance theory. Don't worry about the actual theory here, but just look at the structure of the way in which this particular objective has been constructed. It's first of all, identifying the data sources, looking for key themes and issues, and that's part of the analysis process, trying to identify key themes and issues. And it's also indicating how those key themes and issues, which were identified through the in-depth interviews with employees, and then it's bringing in, can we interrogate that data, those key themes and issues, using the models and frameworks that are associated with this particular theoretical set of concepts. So it's nicely illustrating how we're bringing together 2 different sets of information and then trying to make sense of what that information actually means. So this would be, again, the type of objective that would be more pertinent to a dissertation capstone. And as I said earlier, for the more practical consultancy projects or startup capstone, the analysis objective would be associated with the reflective critique. It wouldn't be presented in the terms of reference that you would produce for a consultancy project that are presented to a client. A client's not necessarily interested in the theoretical side, but the university is. And that's why we have split the consultancy projects and the business startup projects into 2 different elements. One is the practical element, and the other is the reflective critique, which is part of the academic perspective that we as the university will require. So moving on then, lastly, to what we've termed outcome objectives. And this type of objective assists in identifying the potential result or conclusion of the research. And I think it's fairly clear here. We're looking at what the research is ultimately trying to achieve. So this is an objective that sets out the potential benefits or recommendations arising from the research that you're undertaking. So all of the research objectives are prospective. So it's looking towards the future in terms of what is going to be achieved, what is going to be the outcome of the research that's being done. So again, another couple of examples, because I think they help to actually put this into perspective. So the first one is to evaluate and design an action plan for the implementation of proposed improvements to the marketing communication strategy of XYZ Retail Bank. Again, there is a huge amount that's been indicated. We've got the language, which is to evaluate and design an action plan. So we're implying there that we're going to try to use and evaluate the data that we've got in order to design this action plan. It's also giving a very clear signpost what that action plan is for. It's for the implementation of proposed improvements to the marketing communication strategy of XYZ Retail Bank. Again, nicely located with a very specific set of boundaries around a particular case study. So these are really good techniques that we're seeing exhibited in these objectives. The second example I've got for you is to develop a customized business strategy for XYZ cruise industry leaders with a focus on China outbound luxury cruise travelers. And we've already seen this an example from this particular piece of research in seminar 2. So hopefully this is something that you're already aware of, because it was one of the activities earlier in seminar 2. So the outcome here is this customized business strategy. And we have a client here, which is XYZ Cruise Industry Leaders. And we've also located it in terms of a particular segment in the tourism industry. So nice objective there. Again, lots of indicators and signposts as to what is trying to be achieved. And this particular type of objective is particularly pertinent for consultancy and business startup projects, because we would expect a consultancy and a business startup to actually come up with a business plan, for example, as an outcome, or a set of recommendations for a client, which is the consultancy projects, both the individual and the group consultancy projects. So several issues there for you to think about in terms of your capstone choices, for example. So the last thing I'd like to draw your attention to is a full set of the objectives associated with one of the pieces of research that I've identified in the previous examples. So this is a piece of research to do with marketing communications, and in particular, the personalization of marketing communications. So if we look at the overall aim is to evaluate the relevance and application of personalization in marketing communications with individual customers in XYZ Retail Bank. So this is giving us an overarching aim and a sense of purpose and direction for where this piece of research is going to go. So that overall aim is then broken down into a set of specific research objectives. So you'll notice here that we have 4 objectives. And what we usually advise is that the research objectives for a piece of business and management research should be between 3 and 5. Less than 3, then you're not kind of segmenting them enough. More than 5, you're probably overcomplicating the piece of research that you're proposing to undertake. So if we go through these and try to link them back to the model that we're evaluating. The first one is to critically evaluate the current focus and academic research regarding personalization in direct marketing in retail banking. So this is our academic perspective. It's looking at the current focus of research and the academic dimension pertaining to the topic that this individual is wanting to take forward in terms of their capstone research. So understanding that academic context is a really important stage in building your research, and therefore that's why this is an important first step in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So second objective is to diagnose and critically evaluate the factors affecting consumer perspectives of personalization of retail banking products and services. So it's identifying the type of data that we're going to, or this individual wants to actually collect. And that's the factors affecting consumer perspectives. So in that one statement where we've identified what type of information we want to collect, and also we've identified who we're trying to target in order to get that information. What isn't in that particular objective is the method by which this individual will collect that information. And that might be something that could have improved that second objective in terms of giving a clear indication as to how the data collection process might develop. The third objective is to analyse key improvements in communication strategy that provide greater depth of personalisation for the case study organisation. So using the academic ideas in terms of communication strategies and the notions of personalisation in terms of direct marketing, bringing those two conceptual ideas together in relation to the data that's been collected for the case study organisation gives us our analytical objective. And then lastly, our outcome objective is to evaluate and design an action plan for the implementation of proposed improvements to the marketing communication strategy of XYZ Retail Bank. So clearly we've got an action plan for implementing improvements to the way in which this organisation has developed its communications strategy. So hopefully you can kind of see how this model may assist you in developing your particular set of research perspectives. What have we actually learned? What are the key lessons to come out of this? Things that you're going to take away and to use as part of the development of your aims and objectives. So first of all, what comes out of this for me is that we need to be aware of the academic perspective and to be clear about our theoretical focus. And as part of seminar 2, we've been encouraging you to engage with peer review literature, to start to do some background reading and to try to understand what it is that's going to inform the theoretical perspective for your particular piece of research. So in the examples that I've presented, we've had concepts such as buyer behaviour, personalisation in market communications, and we've also had examples of business planning. So some nice theoretical focus there that's going to assist you. But you can only do that by actually engaging with the literature and beginning to do your background research. Very important. As the other lesson that I've taken away from this is as objectives progress, particularly the last example that I've given you, they tend to narrow the focus of the research. So you may start with quite a wide conceptual focus, but it begins to narrow down. And I often use the analogy of a funnel, starting with the bigger picture in terms of academic, but narrowing it down into a specific focus or application. And that might be around the need of a particular business to develop its strategy or an action plan or a business startup plan. So that funneling, really assists in giving you a specific outcome for your particular project. The other thing I think is a key learning point is to think about the master's level of analysis. So the language that you use in articulating your research objectives needs to reflect this master's level of analysis. So we've seen words like critical evaluation being used. So do think about this in terms of the way in which you express these objectives and the level of analysis that is being reflected. The next key learning point is about locating your particular investigation. And what we've seen in these objectives are examples where a particular organization is the focus. So that gives us a great kind of opportunity to explore case study research. There's examples of geographical regions, for example, Singapore. So you could look at a particular sector analysis, and that would be interesting as well. And where you locate your research needs to also be reflected in the wording of the aim and the objectives, so that you get a level of precision in terms of where you're actually trying to conduct this particular investigation. And I think last but not least is a very important key learning point. Try not to overcomplicate or overload your objectives. Keeping them simple and focused and to the point is really important, because you'll lose your reader in terms of their understanding of what you're trying to achieve. But this means that you have to be a bit of a wordsmith. And our experience suggests that students kind of work with their objectives, constantly refining them, choosing their words really, really carefully in order to get the essence of what they're trying to achieve in a simple but direct way. So do think about that. You may not get it right the first time, and your objectives will continue to evolve as your reading and research evolves, and the discussions that you have with your supervisor when you get to the capstone stage. So some really important lessons there for you to think about and to try to apply to the development of your own research investigation. Okay, hopefully that's given you some food for thought, and we'll be in a position to evaluate some of these as we progress through the CAB programme.